We are live. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm live here with Dennis Steigerwalt. Dennis is the president at the Housing Innovation Alliance and also a prop tech investor. Looking to have some really good conversations today about getting to hell yes. So, a reminder for everyone in the conversation: getting to hell yes is talking about how we sell and how we identify our buyers and then the buyer's journey. And what's really interesting about the conversation with Dennis, both from an investor perspective and also as president of Housing Innovation Alliance, he's driving with his organization, kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what construction looks like to help solving the housing and affordability crisis that we're kind of dealing with in the medium to long term here. So new ways of ideas, new ways of doing it, and obviously those things require you kind of think about who your buyer is, because you can't just build innovation for innovation's sake. So Dennis, why don't you kick it off here? A little bit of brief introduction to yourself, how you got to where you are, and then we'll kind of dig into getting into hell yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning, and thanks for having me on the show today. I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and your audience. I know we're dialing in from two different coasts right now. I'd love to be with you out at the IMN SFR conference. It's one of those
That's
ones that I
right.
really enjoy getting to. I was down in Miami earlier. I guess it would be beginning of summer to join that crowd down there for the East Coast event. But sure to be a good one. Look forward to hearing from it. Hearing what you take away from it.
Yeah, the IMN guys do a great job. No, they
Yeah,
do a great job. So let's hear about you.
they do. Yeah. So I'm Dennis Steigerwalt, president of Housing Innovation Alliance, as you said in the introduction. So I run a national network of about 2,000 companies focused on strategic growth and innovation opportunities in residential construction, primarily let's call single-family detached and attached housing, and community development. And our goal is to help organizations look out and around the corner so they can take measured risk in driving their business forward. Right. So I can dig into the details of what we do and how we do it in a little bit, but through through the Housing Innovation Alliance, I've had the opportunity also to kind of explore other areas of innovation within the built environment. As you mentioned, I have I participate in a variety of kind of angel groups, if you will, and I act as an LP in a number of investment funds that are targeting very specific outcomes within innovation activities within the built environment, how we can boost productivity, increase quality, and drive down costs overall of the homes that we're creating for the consumer. And then I've also been able to participate in a number of real estate development projects here in the Pittsburgh market from both a kind of renovate and rent perspective, but then also looking at some ground up new construction. And this year we, through the Housing Innovation Alliance and partnerships with some of those companies that we've invested in, or portcos for some of the funds I'm involved with, we delivered the Picket Fence concept home, which is kind of a true manifestation, if you will, of all these concepts that we've been talking about across these three platforms that I'm involved in.
Outstanding. So when you take a look at ultimately all these different groups and coordinating everyone to achieve the overall mission of the Housing Innovation Alliance, how do you align all of their motivations? And then getting to the kind of the hell yes conversation, like everyone's got to get paid. So how do you ensure that they're aligned with the motivation of the Housing Innovation Alliance, in addition to making sure that it's commercially feasible and in the timeframes that you guys kind of got to deliver on?
Yeah, well, what's interesting when you have an organization the size of ours that kind of has a reach across the United States, one of the challenges we face is that you have a variety of, let's just say, focused primarily first on production home builders, right? So we'll have builders that are delivering 100 units in a very specific market, all the way through to builders that are delivering tens of thousands of units nationally. They're coming at this with different end in mind, different starting point, a different set of resources that they can leverage to kind of achieve their goals. So really what we try to do is spend the time with them to understand what are their pain points, or as we've talked about in our conversations, what are their real blockers? What do they need to achieve from an organizational perspective? What do they want personally out of this? What's the legacy they want to leave behind? And then we aggregate them with peer groups and curate conversations that allow them to collectively achieve these goals. So you kind of think about it, if you look at the Venn diagram of the activities we work on, there are activity sets that 90% of our audience is interested and focused on. But then there might be others where it's a smaller subgroup of, say, 10 to 20% that we're helping to kind of, again, tailor that conversation around them, their needs, and surrounding them with peers that are facing some of the same challenges and problems. So really a lot of what we do, I look at it as time is our most valuable resource, right? So how can I help them kind of cheat time a little bit in the process of creating the right tools and resources, and then connecting with the right people that help them take the measured risk they need to take to advance their organization. Again, looking at 3 to 5 year out timeline.
And I can make sure the audience understand, like, you guys are for profit. Like
We are
there is
for profit, yeah.
Right. And so it's not just an innovation kind of like, fun that you're out there trying to figure things out. You guys have to figure out how to make money.
Correct. So we act a bit as advisors. We're really
Mhm.
acting as advisors to the members of our organization, and we have a variety of tiers in which folks can get engaged with our network. But yeah, in reality, I mean, our goal is to help demonstrate long-term ROI for each one of our members, and that's why they keep coming back and subscribing to be a part of this advisory work with us.
Very cool. Tell us what the latest project you guys just kicked off.
Oh yeah, so you're talking about the picket fence.
Yeah, Picket
Yeah.
Fence is very cool.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that was something that we dreamed up in 2022. I sit on I'm involved with Urban Land Institute, and within Urban Land Institute, they have these product councils. So they're kind of a smaller subset of the membership that is focused on a very specific product type or category of the built environment. So I sit within the Residential Neighborhood Development Council. And during one of our meetings, I was speaking with one of the council leaders at the time, and we were just brainstorming ideas about moving the industry forward. And they had just completed the the second wave of a study called the American Home Study, which is a
Mhm.
very unique set of consumer insights from early pandemic, peak pandemic, and then when we got involved post pandemic, that allows us to see how consumers think about how they use their homes, what they would do differently within their home, and the key purchase motivators as they look going forward. So, how do we meet
Mhm.
consumers where they truly are? Um, they built a concept home with Garmin Homes in Raleigh, North Carolina, to showcase the learnings from the first two waves of the study. And when we met them, I said, I love what you did from the consumer perspective. Let's talk about an industry buildability perspective. So we took a lot of the concepts that we're working on within the Housing Innovation Alliance. I said, let's run another wave of the study. Let's take this in and then apply it where we use systems built housing solutions. Let's go full end of the other end of the spectrum from site built. Let's go volumetric modular. And then before you know it, the momentum started behind this project, and we had an entire, a national team in Pittsburgh touring sites, touring different production facilities. And then we rolled our sleeves up and dug in, designed the home, put it into production at the end of last year, and then launched it earlier this year in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So the Picket Fence has its entire website dedicated to kind of on delayering the story, if you will. But really,
Mhm.
what this was our way of interpreting the data that we captured from 10,000 households around the country, identifying a very specific buyer. In this case, it was the Trailblazer, which falls within the millennial. It's a millennial cohort. Uh,
Mhm.
they were very likely to live within the zip code and in the site that we have employment opportunities that were offered in and around this site. So we designed every inch of this house around what they were looking for based off the insights gathered from this study. And since it was an infill location and already zoned for 2 units, we decided to build it as a fully integrated ADU with a full townhome above it.
Mhm.
Um, the idea there also being, so this is a missing middle housing solution, taking advantage of the infrastructure and the zoning that's already in place, but then also creating an opportunity to generate an income stream to offset the housing costs of living in the upper unit.
Oh,
In
really?
so
Okay, so there's an up down kind of scenario.
Yes, correct. So the
Got
ground
it.
floor is a 660 square foot ADU, if you will,
Mhm.
and it's a one bedroom with a lot of beautiful built-ins and tons of cabinet and storage space. And then the second and third floor is actually a 2,000 square foot, three bedroom, two and a half bathroom, 2,000 square foot townhome. Um,
Is it all modular or was it all built on site?
it was all built modular off-site in a facility about an hour and a half north of Pittsburgh. It came in
Very cool.
three large building sections, if you will. So these were roughly
Mhm.
16 by 64 feet, and they
Mhm.
were craned into place within, it was just under 12 hours. All three modules were set. So
So
we went,
16 by 64, is that fit on a train? Is that a train load or is that a truckload?
that's a truckload. It's an oversized truck, but it's a truckload.
Yeah.
It's basically the maximum width we can easily transport in the state of Pennsylvania. And then also is from the length perspective, that was a function of the site, the design, the production capabilities, and then also being able to the logistics of trucking and then setting this particular
Yeah.
site box, because it was an infill location. So there's a series of vacant lots within um, a well-populated area within the city of Pittsburgh, and the idea was just to kind of reactivate that particular site.
Tell us a little about the missing middle. Or is messy middle missing middle? I mean,
Well, I guess the missing middle can get messy.
it can get messy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that seems like a market. I mean, obviously, people are talking about millennials every single day. So I'll tell you just the kind of lead up to the question. When we hear about housing right now, and I'm at the single family rental conference in the U in Phoenix right now, and it's obviously the combination of everything in terms of like being able to build houses, being able to afford houses. That whole thing is kind of pushing at each other. The amount of supply that's online, where people live, how they want to live, like the whole idea of home seekers instead of home buyers and renters, right? Like we're looking subscription housing, the millennial buy mindset in terms of where they want to own and where they want to live. All these things are all converging on the marketplace. That's creating this messy middle. And then you add to it, I think the number I heard is that like every single day, 10,000 millennials turn 37, which is now like the average age to buy a home in the US. And so you have this like convergence of all these macro data points where it seems as though the products in the market right now don't seem to satisfy. How do you guys, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of questions there that we can dig into, but I think the data point you brought around millennials and the average purchasing age and the fact of how many millennials are turning of this age right now is really you're right. It's going to continue to add additional constraint, or strain on the kind of the inventory issues that we face in the industry. I think if we can walk down the path of what is missing middle housing and how do we continue to explore these building typologies, I think there's a couple challenges. One, does current land use and zoning allow us to do this? One, and these are housing types that in many neighborhoods they already exist.
Mhm.
We've just kind of been steered away from them by an increasing regulatory and land use environment. But then also, I think when you start to look at folks, in order to be in the locations they want to be in, I think we're starting to look at opportunities to accept different housing solutions as well,
For
right?
sure.
I think size. For example, I talked about that picket fence, the picket fence project. I mean, the most desirable unit out of the two so far, based off our feedback and leasing the units up, has been the smaller unit. Right, it's called the right-sized unit within this ADU. Folks that are looking
Yep.
for, they want to be in the urban core. They want to have less to take care of. They want the built-in features. They want a home that was designed, that was very thoughtful in its design, is easy to maintain, and has a low utility footprint. Right. I mean, that's really, so. If you think about how that translates, missing middle allows us to accomplish a lot of that. If you think of everything from like single family detached homes all the way through to like a mid-rise, all that product in the middle that we need to design and deliver for folks to have, housing where they can thrive and communities that are connected, and human scale. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a significant number of developers that are now incorporating this type of housing solution into their communities, and I think they're seeing
Yeah.
a huge, a very positive response from consumers in that way as well.
Does this feel a lot like a modern twist of the Levittown playbook from like the post war? Like we've got this massive, just like stepping back, we have this massive generation of home buyers, similar to baby boomers returning from the war. You've got this massive shortage in terms of like housing that's available. We've got to be able to they've got to live somewhere. And, whereas that was kind of the invention of suburbia, now we're feeling a reinvention of bringing the comforts of that mass produced housing for a specific market. And I mean, the twist that I heard from you is that now we're urbanizing it versus suburbanizing it, but really it feels a lot like it's the same playbook.
Well, I think need spurs creativity, right?
Yeah.
And our nature is to solve problems, right? And the problem we need to solve right now is, if you look at, I have nothing against moving into suburbia, but the cost of dragging utilities and setting up all the necessary
Oh, yeah.
infrastructure to get into these environments versus leveraging infill opportunities or suburban opportunities that exist in various markets is massive. I can't. One of the things, when I first got into the real estate space back in 2001, my first internship was with a development company that had all they focused on was brownfield redevelopment in and around
Hmm.
in Western Pennsylvania. So you think
Yeah.
of Pittsburgh, right? City of Bridges, Three Rivers. We had,
Yes. Complicated. Hills.
you know,
It's hilly. It's
yeah,
hilly
yeah,
and
well,
foresty.
it's uphill both ways in most of the city, right? Depending on who you talk to. But we all of these. There was a number of steel mills and manufacturing facilities that, for ease of logistics and costs, were based along the rivers. So
Mhm.
when these facilities were winding down, they actually created a great sandbox to go in and create community. Because if you think about it, a lot of these mills were at the end of downtown, right? Or the
Mhm.
end of the main street. So you walked past all the shops and stores, and then you had the working place, and then on your way home, you'd be able to do all this again. And what you see, what I experienced for the first time was you could take these what were industrial and economic drivers in their own right and reactivate them into these thriving communities. So for me, that was the first aha moment of, and it relates back to that missing middle concept, because when you think about the housing typologies that are incorporated in these newer communities, they tend to be extensions of the existing kind of community plan. So you start to see more of
Yeah.
this creativity in how we're creating density and adding more households and headcount per square foot, if you will.
Well, I mean, and the density conversation is it's becoming unavoidable, right? Like when you look at the just the sheer cost to let's eliminate the access fee. Let's eliminate the capital infrastructure fee costs. Just to operate isn't even practical anymore. Like there are fire stations that you can't man, right? There are police stations and EMS depots that simply can't put people in there because they're just too far and too separated. And the cost of operating even legacy infrastructure is becoming overwhelming from a property tax base. And so what do? You raise income, you raise property taxes because density isn't there, or you start planning for density so you can actually maintain and maintain these core services, right?
Yeah, yeah, no,
It's really interesting. And so like when you take a look at now, the problem with brownfield has always been that it had to be built on site, right?
I'm not sure I follow you mean when you say built on
Well,
site.
like in brownfield, like typically, you're not looking at a suburban type community where you can just scrape and fill and then put up 300 homes, and then now you've got your economics, right? Like in a urban setting, you just don't simply have that land available. And so what I'm getting at is that we heard here often is that in order to kind of rehabilitate brownfield, historically it's been either onesies, twosies, or maybe a few lots, maybe a multifamily. But as we get into kind of solving the problem that you're talking about, how do we begin to mass produce homes in these areas so we can start solving the downtown problem, the density problem, and then the housing problem, right? Because that's, if I hear what you're talking about, you're kind of addressing those three things at once.
Yeah, well, I think the example I provided in Pittsburgh. I mean, these communities are anywhere from 200 to 600 units at a clip, right? So
Yeah,
they're not going to solve shortages in the hundreds of thousands on an annual basis on a national
but they're
scale.
not they're not 2 to 5 at a time.
No, they're not. No, they're larger. I mean, and there's a great deal of work that goes into them that shouldn't be underestimated, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
remediation process and kind of going through and making sure that it is a safe and high quality place to live takes time. But the point there was that is another instance where necessity creates creativity, or it leads to
Mhm.
creativity, and I think we have this opportunity in a number of different environments throughout the country right now, where we're going to continue to get more creative as developers look for and seek ways to deliver on the demand of housing across the country. One of the data points I saw recently that I thought was really interesting is the reduction in the premium, or the delta between existing for sale homes and new
Mhm.
construction for sale homes, right? And I can't remember the exact data point off the top of my head, but let's just say it went roughly down from 15 to 5%. So
Mhm.
now, historically, that's a really interesting opportunity for home builders and developers to create communities in new ways. To your point, planning for the future and how we will live, and how these things kind of holistically, as we develop them, take into consideration all the costs of occupancy and the
Mhm.
life cycle, right? It's not just the home and the energy efficiency of that house, but it's really how are we connected into the neighborhood, and how's the neighborhood connected into the broader community, and how are these all playing off one another. And I think as we look at satisfying this housing demand that's out there, we're going to have a really, really interesting opportunity to listen to consumers and
Mhm.
hear where their pain points and blockers are, understand what their motivators are for making decisions, how we help align what they want in their hearts and what their wallets can bear, right? I mean, and deliver some really interesting housing solutions. And then our group is here to help find the technologies, the products, the founders that can help to create those solutions and bring them to light. And that's probably what the most exciting thing is. I mean, the gap is getting, the shortage is getting worse on an annual basis, right? We're just not delivering as much.
Totally.
We need to address our annual demand, let alone the backlog. So how do we continue to get ahead of that? And that's where it's a really exciting time to be involved in this space and to be working with a number of established players who have the organizational infrastructure to drive that change.
And as we were talking earlier, like, I mean, you ultimately have to sell a lot of people, right? A lot of different audiences. I mean, even presumably from the investor side of things, right? To be able to fund these projects, you've got to sell the development frameworks. You got to sell the neighborhood, the neighborhoods you're putting these into, because they're innovative, they're different. And so you hear that you might hear a lot of "not in my backyard" kind of arguments. And then ultimately, you end up having to sell it to a lessor, a renter, a resident that's going to have to be in these spaces, or a buyer, right? And maybe you can turn that over to an operator down the road, or a separate owner. Like, all along the way, you are selling to somebody else, and it's a new and novel idea. That in and itself is, a lot of layers of hell yeses. But like, how do you find, let's kind of like ignore the investor piece there, because that's probably fundamental, but how do you begin to sell into the neighborhoods that you're selling into, to make it a compelling development and something to consider versus the alternatives that are out there?
Well, I think to look at your question from the angle where I support the industry. So the developers and the builders that we work with they're dealing with a layer of complexity and opportunity around some of the NIMBYism that you mentioned, and how these master plans come to light. What we're looking for is understanding if this is we look to take the vision they have for that community or for their housing solution, and how we can help maintain the integrity of that through execution, vertical construction, delivery of the home, the quality of the home, the durability, resiliency of that home. So my primary audience that I'm working with is the community developer and the builder, that have already committed to delivering homes in a certain that perform in a certain way and have certain attributes and values to them, right? Or perceived value from the consumer. So the hell yeah
Mhm.
moment, or the hell yes moment that we kind of see within our network is it's kind of like, I look through it through three lenses, right? So there's one, there's a lot of people in the built environment that are curious about innovation. Hey, there's an
Sure.
interesting cartoon, right? There's an interesting cartoon that says something like, yes to innovation, no to change. And I think we're constantly threading the needle between, do we have the resources? Do we have the internal energy? Do we have the organization to support these concepts and ideas? And then do we have the stomach for it if things don't work out the way that we need to? So what
Right.
I do is I kind of look for three qualities within the folks within our network that to support this. One, are they personally motivated, and can they personally grow and share through this platform that we've created? Yes.
Mhm.
All right. If we can clear that hurdle, then two, does their business have the organizational structure that's going to allow them to take the insights that they gather from this sharing with one another back in, interpret them, and deploy them? Okay. And if we have that, third, can we give them a place where this is the industry they've picked for their career? Can we give them a
Mhm.
place, their thumbprint, to leave their legacy on this planet through this platform? So we try to really tick all three of those boxes, because that's what keeps people committed. It's what keeps them engaged. It keeps that social contract of we're all here to share and learn from one another
Mhm.
open and forming. And I mentioned we have 2,000 companies, and I'm quite proud of the fact that we've been able to grow the organization to that size.
Wow.
In any given year, we have roughly, I would say there's 150 to 200 of them that are actively engaged in exchanging information, trying to align partnerships to work towards different pilot projects, and then
Mhm.
looking at scale projects that they've run through us in the past. So a lot of this is happening behind the scenes, because what the market sees through us, or from us, is we're a crowd accelerated innovation platform, right? We're connecting
Mhm.
people, capital, and ideas to constantly challenge one another to do things a little better, to do things a little different. And then occasionally we have these, occasionally we will have these concepts come in that really challenge the way in which we're approaching something. And then it's not, we're not just about, we're not here to just be disruptive for disruption's sake. We're looking for any opportunity we can take that will help us improve the quality of what we're delivering to the consumer, and to help us benefit those within our network and give them something of real business value.
Well, what I think really interesting though about what you're doing, which I'll give you credit for being different, is that you're not just creating an alliance of people to connect and meet and greet and broker relationships. You're doing something. Like you're building something. You're putting the proof out there, right? And I think that take credit for that because a lot of these organizations are out there just trying to connect people, but you're not only connecting people, you're aligning with a mission and delivering on the mission. And so the output isn't just theoretical or academic, it's practical, right? And I think that's something that, especially in this industry, they do lean towards a practical solution or practical evidence of this can actually work. You and I were talking earlier about like the Honda house, right? Like it seems a bit foreign for us, in North America to think why Honda was building a experimental house. But these innovations in terms of housing are things that we do need to innovate on and experiment on. And I want to give you credit and shout it out that like, hey, you guys are doing it. Like this picket fence development. I mean, how many units in picket fence?
So it's one home with 2 units within it, right?
One home's 2 units, right? And the goal is to scale that out and begin to push that forward and get people into it. So the renters moved in for Thanksgiving, or the residents.
Correct. Yeah. So the ADU unit is now occupied, and
Yeah,
we're screening tenants for the top floor, or
outstanding.
for the upper unit. And so one of the things to kind of build on that point, I appreciate the recognition of we're walking the talk as an organization, and by building out this concept home and embody that embraces everything that we've kind of learned through the organization over the past few years. We'd like to see this a model that's repeated. Just like we challenge ourselves within all of our events. Is I've kind of joked is it the picket fence challenge, in that now that we've put this out there, who has the other idea of how we can do it, and then let's bring that team together, and then let's implement more.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that there's elements of the picket fence that absolutely can be scaled, right? The picket fence itself could be scaled as is. But
Mhm.
there's pieces that people will learn from and take and apply into their business around what we've done from a health and wellness perspective, the systems that we use to bring it together, the design
Mhm.
and planning approach. But for us, from the outset, to your point about this has to be scalable and it has to be beneficial for the broader industry, we partnered with Professional Builder, or Pro Builder Media on the front end to make this one of their idea homes for 2024.
Mhm.
And I mentioned earlier that there's a website. It's pbpicketfencehome.com. You can
Okay.
see the entire journey, but the idea here was everything we went through, we wanted to make it readily available for anybody in the industry to learn from, so that
Like
it could
open
be
source.
it could literally be a blueprint, right?
Yeah.
To take these concepts and bring them into your business, and understand who some of the right partners could be to help accelerate that learning curve within your organization.
So when you got so like let's go with let's follow that out. So open source kind of planning and design. Um, you had to get a factory to build these.
Correct.
What kind of convincing did that take?
Well, we were close to a factory in Pennsylvania that had a history and a reputation of working on some very high end, high performance homes
Yeah.
over the years. So we were able to tap into the knowledge that they already had embedded within the organization and marry the leadership team up with the concept of promoting not only the production capabilities or what systems built housing, specifically modular construction, could do for the housing supply shortage, but also truly understanding how consumers think, feel, and act in terms of housing purchases could mean for the future of designing homes with their organization. So they saw both the short and long term benefits of being a part of the project, and were very very interested to allow us to kind of inform their any changes that it might require in their supply chain or differences in how they design and engineer their modules for this particular project. So I remember
It's super.
recently we were at a Modular Home Building Association conference that was actually here in Pittsburgh, and we were able to share a handful of takeaways from the factory's production team that they now incorporate into every one of their homes going forward. So there
So,
were some things that they applied immediately from that, and that's the kind of thing that we want to see, and we're glad to see that outcome.
so where do you think, like in terms of like obviously we're talking about factories, right? And shipping, and logistics. So where do you think that what's the practical radius to serve a market for a manufactured home, or what's the best language? Like a system-based home? I don't want to use manufactured home because that's stigma to it.
Systems built housing is going to be a spectrum of different solutions, right? For
Yeah.
volumetric modular, um,
Logic.
Yeah. So for
What's a
volumetric,
practical radius for a factory to operate and push out homes
you know,
in a
I
modular way?
always, the key question there is, or the key qualifier there is practical.
Yeah.
I think, it always reminds me of another Pittsburgh native, Jeff Goldblum. Whenever we get involved in modular construction, in Jurassic Park, he made the comment, "We got too busy thinking about if we can. Nobody thought if we should."
Right.
I think oftentimes what happens is, there's not enough thought process, or there's not enough upfront and thoughtfulness put into how do we optimize for this particular project, and what is the right system to do that. It's more of a forcing function of the system onto the project. So we look
Right.
to embrace that, and I think if you're embracing that, depending on the size of the modules and where they're going, a few hundred miles, if you think
hmm
200, 300 miles is kind of your sweet spot.
And is
Certainly
that
a little further, but that's kind of where I'd aim.
is that the weakness in the modular model is the once a factory starts churning out, it's got to keep going. You got to feed the machine. So is that because they can't just tool and die out something that's for homes, right? I mean, you're kind of building expertise and specialization. How does that how does that work in the long run? Could a factory do like a 3-year run on modular and then retool, or is it like we got to keep producing homes and then figuring out better ways to manage logistics of it all?
I think the most successful factories are very good at managing that production pipeline and being
Sure.
able to ebb and flow, right? And I think there's cases of, calling it kind of, let's call them smaller factories that serve a much tighter local market, all the way through to much larger organizations that have optimized production, will ship further than those numbers that I just mentioned, because
hmm
they produce a certain type of home out of a certain factory in the southeast, and that home is spread out to a much larger market, but that they've really dialed in on that product and that solution. So I think, I don't know that I'd say logistics is certainly one of the considerations that you need to take, that you need in your planning process. I don't know that I'd say that that's a disadvantage. If you think about the number of trips to site with a traditional site built construction home, right? And getting from, in the Pittsburgh market, I just use the example, if someone has to go from the South Hills to the North Hills, there's a bridge and a tunnel involved there. That's like
Right.
that, you might as well be driving from Pittsburgh to New Jersey when you have to do that, right?
For
So
sure.
I think that there's a variety of ways. When I talk to folks that are doing traditional site built construction, modular looks very messy and complex. When I talk to folks
hmm
that build modular construction, site built looks very messy and complex, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's all the beauty is in the eye of the beholder there. And I think really what happens is an organization does what it's organized to do. And I think if you just have to think that it's a different operating model and structure that allows you to be successful in that. And then getting back to your point on kind of the scale of these factories, I think varying markets and production capabilities, it's going to come back to how well can I even flow this production, so that when I'm staffing up and training my talent, that I'm able to keep that talent consistently at a consistent workflow. And that's going to be through certain levels of mechanization and even automation that have to be brought in to create a great working environment, again, and to lower the labor demand. But then also looking at opportunities to, put the right people in the right spots and train up new talent for these organizations.
It is. I mean, I think like when I look at home building, also yeah, housing construction for housing, it's a very interesting conundrum right now, because there's so much demand on it. There's very little skill available relative to the demand, right? Those that are skilled are skilled, but there's just relative to the demand stuff, there's just not that much. It is largely a handmade experience, right? So you're talking about craftsmanship versus production, and that's creating a lot of flaws. Like we have a lot of, if you ever want to burn 2 hours, just look at what's the guy's name, Sci-Fi Inspections out of Phoenix, right? Just like grind that for a while and look at the things that they find in production homes. We've been supporting production home builders for a long time, and we've seen the demand on the service side of the organization increase, right? Because they just it's just not possible. And so it's interesting in terms of the dynamic of home builders versus suppliers. For those in the audience that don't, maybe don't realize it, a home builder is usually typically a project manager, and they subcontract it out to like 20 different trades to build a home, and trades are suppliers. And then the home builder is accountable for the quality of that home at the end of the day. Well, the quality of the suppliers is extremely variable, right? Roofing crews, framing crews, all these things are extremely variable. And so what we were seeing is a lot of pre-production already happening. So in the spirit of modular, if you live in a brand new custom home, there are parts of that home that were modular. I assure you that. roof trusses, floor trusses, walls, bearing walls, all that stuff is pre-manufactured these days and delivered on site, windows, right? And so it's interesting to feel this progression from, um, you know, some assembly may be required to, fully assembled. And now we're just kind of 4 or 5 pieces that are coming together to build a home. And it just makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Given the progression of manufacturing might that we've got in North America, that this is where we go. I mean, often I ask the question, like, is there another way? Like, we've is when you consider the solution that you're bringing to market, right? For all the different stakeholders, and let's talk about the modular construction pieces being a core differentiator. That in order to achieve these objectives, that's kind of what you had to do, right? That's how I understand it, right? Um, and correct me if I'm wrong. The the stigma around modular housing doesn't really apply any longer. And if someone could tell me a different way that we're going to do this, I'm all ears, but I just don't see it. I just don't see how manufacturing isn't the answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right when you talk about the fact that there's a variety of systems built solutions components that are in almost every home today, right? I mean, and that's a really, it's taken quite a bit of time to get to that level of adoption, and that's because we need to. There's a lot of education that has to go on from the regulatory side of it all the way through to the trades, and the architects and engineers that are working with these systems, but they have immediate impacts on construction waste, cycle times, but then also downstream benefits that the other trades can come in and work faster and quicker because everything's in place exactly as it was meant to be,
Yep. Yep.
right? And there's large infrastructure and supply chain built up and continuing to build up around this. And I think I think the fact that in recent months we've seen an escalation of M&A activity with some of the larger builders in the market.
Mhm.
I think the bigger they get, the more that they're going to be exploring these alternative methods of construction or modern methods of construction, depending how you want to refer to them, that allow them to achieve their desired quality outcomes and value equation that they're looking for from a profit perspective, and total cost of the consumer. So I think this is I agree with you. I think this is an upward, we're in the early innings of this still. And I think what we're going to see is, a kind of a what I'll call a technology solution mix that starts to continue to work its way into the housing ecosystem over the next decade. Just
But
as,
it's kind of the only way we can introduce technology. Like, like not just like uh, smart homes, but like actual, a system of innovation to manufacturing, to building a better home, right? Is to eliminate the human error, scale it out, and also reduce the configuration options so that you can actually build it with some sort of modularity.
yeah, a bit more standardization in what we're delivering, right?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah. Yeah.
eliminate?
I mean, look at the thing that, like, Steve Jobs takes over Apple, right? First thing he does is cut out like 80% of the products they're building because it's just too complicated, and look where they are now. I was sharing with you and I'm going to send over an introduction to an old friend of mine, Matt Vermont, who's running the residential business at ATCO. One of our customers, ATCO Gas, is a utility, and they started their business as a modular construction. Like, this is the very first formation of the company was a modular tent and trailer company for commercial sites, and they're still one of the biggest in the world at delivering that. But they're getting into residential home construction as well. And I'm going to catch you both. I think there's some, obviously you guys have a lot of alignment with respect to aspirations for the future. But I was listening to do you ever listen to Jay Parsons? He's an economist for Madeira. He does a lot of really cool stuff on housing, and I recommend you listen to it. He's outstanding podcast guy. And he was talking about, he had an interview with the CEO of Invitation Homes, which is ironically, I'm at the SFR conference, and Invitation started as modular housing, right? And I didn't know that. And it's just really interesting to hear these different progressions in terms of all these companies that have been able to scale. They've had some sort of roots in a modular mentality. And I just don't see it as avoidable. Like, I ask people to bring other solutions to the table. And it's like, oh, we need to bring in more plumbers and more, we need to bring in, we need to relax our immigration laws around that. And I don't think that's a real practical solution, given how long it takes to build a home and how long it takes to build a trade, like a tradesperson. Like you're talking like 5 years to build a tradesperson and 9 months to build a home. That's just not going to work. So I invite the conversation and the argument around how we're going to fix this any other way. And I just don't see it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it comes back to the amount of talent available in the industry, and how everybody gets to work and do the jobs that they love as effectively and as efficiently as possible, right? And
Uh,
I think working in a factory built environment is one of the ways in which we enable that. I think there's other reasons why, there's reasons why the structure is what it is today, and the flexibility that that system allows, and the entrepreneurship that it drives. So there's things about that that should live on and will continue to carry on through these models. And some of it comes back to what you mentioned earlier about the, making sure you're maintaining your production at the factories, because those are big capital investments, much different than you're investing in what what you might need as a typical trade at a smaller scale, right? So it's all the scale and the flexibility of how the overall ecosystem has to run, and how we can kind of level set the production across the board. And it's what everybody's aiming for, and how you just do it as efficiently as possible with the resource set that you have.
so for this to scale, like what's the one thing that has to be unblocked? Like, is it that for people to say, for this to go from like, the 2, 3 homes, to 3 units to 300 units to 3,000 units to 30,000 units? What has to get unblocked?
Yeah, I don't think that there's one specific answer for the country, right? Unless you did like a
Mhm.
national, unless you kind of took a national building code type of approach.
Yeah.
But I do think if you start with the regulatory environment, and I know the ICC has been working pretty heavily on that. There's a number of states that have kind of adopted some general standards around offsite construction, how it,
Mhm.
how to incorporate it into your projects, how to inspect it and perform it, and make sure it's performing the way it's intended to. So I think there's a number of states that are working through that. The Modular Home Building Institute, or the Modular Builders Association, they're working on a number of programs as well. So I think the education component around the regulatory piece is probably the biggest opportunity that
Interesting.
exists on a national scale. And then it comes down to trade awareness and education on understanding the benefits of working with. Let's not worry about just volumetric modular right now, or focus on that, but let's focus on, again, that broader spectrum of system built solutions. The benefits having working with these advanced, or these alternative methods, can mean for your business. So
Mhm.
and how to adjust your operating model and pricing mechanisms to support that change, right? It's kind of goes back to the idea of, you want to change before you're forced to change, right? And I think that's kind of where we're at generationally speaking. It's a couple of things you mentioned: consumers and the mindset around how their home is built. I think there's a lot more questions around quality. There's a lot more questions around precision. We have the expectation that we can go online and design something in a configurator, get an exact price, and we know how long it's going to take to get to us. How does that translate into some of the biggest investments we make in our life? Well, we've already seen it with cars. How about with,
Mhm.
and we've seen it with cars for quite a while. How about does that translate into a home? And there's groups working on that. So I think there's that. So we've seen the consumer mindset is bought in, right? And even inquiring and curious about it. I think now it's working more on the generational transition that's taking place within the home builders, and within the trades. As the next generation of leadership steps in, what does this mean for their business, and how do they think differently about how they deliver
Mhm.
homes, work with their talent base to deliver the service that they deliver.
I think that your comment though, in terms of like wanting to change or needing to change, is really the definition of hell yes. Like, to kind of bring things back to why we're talking when we start the conversation, is like, we don't, as a human race, like we're not really inclined to want to change. We only change when we need to change. Um, and as a population. And so I got to think that we're moving into a space where we need to change. Like and I think that I'll give my personal story. Like, as a parent of 3 children, a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old, like, there's a real practicality they'll never own a house. Like, that's a real conversation because of the cost of housing, right? And it's kind of a shocking revelation. Oh, unless we shell out money, but that's not going to happen in my house. But like, then I hope my kids hear that. But that's a real practicality where it's not even just the millennials that aren't going to be able to afford homes. It's like, whose children are going to be able to afford homes? And then you end up with the institutional capital owning all the homes in the world. And is that really the society we want to live in? So it can really makes for some really good, bottles of wine conversations of the societies we live in and how they look.
Yeah. No, I it's interesting you bring that topic up. The conversation happens often amongst some of my close friends and I around are you planning for college? Or are you planning for housing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because one might be easier to get a loan for than the other down the road, right? And I don't mean to laugh at all, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, I had since I'm in the space, I'm more, I lean much more towards what does it look like to keep a roof to provide that shelter solution, and the cost and economics. Like, what does that mean for creating a healthy, happy environment with so much of your health determinants related to kind of like the social aspects of where you grow up and where you
Yeah.
are, right? And so I think, yeah, it's certainly, I think it's a focus point. And I worked in the Middle East for a number of years shortly after the Arab Spring, and was working in the housing space there. And a lot of the housing activities that we were working on were a result of the countries needed to satisfy the demand for housing,
Yeah.
so that households could form and communities could be created and economic activity could drive economic activity. And without that, things can get a little messy.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's, so big, it's certainly close to home here as well as with everybody else. No, I guess pun intended.
So do you think um and for everyone listening, my oldest goes to school just an hour east of Pittsburgh, so I kind of know the area a little bit. And it's certainly interesting to follow the election through his eyes. And do you think the manufacturing kind of heartland is where this opportunity is really going to emerge versus the Southwest, right? Where you've got sprawl and space. Like, is that constraint of wanting to live where you want to live and just the lack of available space, and maybe there's initiatives and motivation for doing that, like where is this going to happen first? Where's the tipping point going to occur that's going to prompt the buyers and then the sellers to both adapt and embrace innovation?
It's a good question. I think, well, I can give you an example of market segment. I don't know about geography just yet, but
Mhm.
I think one. So you have examples. You're in Phoenix right now, I believe, right? Is that what the
Yeah.
yeah? So I mean, there's a number of examples of component manufacturers and structural system providers that are operating in that market right now, and that's a speed and quality conversation, right?
Hmm.
How can we get it up fast and get it up right at the right value? Uh,
Hmm.
and there's other reasons, but there's if you think about it, there's in a fast growth market like you described, you get into rural parts of the country, it's hard to find the trade base that can build
Hmm.
the speed, and so we have folks that own land and need to want to upgrade or want to build on that family land, and they there's like rural Pennsylvania is full of these pockets where it's hard to find a builder or a trade base.
Yeah.
So I think so geographies will vary, but one project I actually put a post up about this morning. It was announced yesterday. Graystar has
Great
a
story.
facility just north of Pittsburgh as well, not far from where we built the picket fence actually.
Mhm.
And I think what you're seeing in hospitality, student housing, healthcare, and multifamily, this is where the drive is going to come from. You have other groups like Amherst that's doing this on the residential side with their own captive factory as well for their
Hmm.
SFR or their built to rent projects
Hmm.
and new construction for sale projects in Texas. So I think you're going to continue to see it's going to be teams that you know feel the pain the most, right? And they're willing to adapt a percentage of their pipeline to this technology so that they can learn from it and translate those learnings over an extended period of time. And there's builders that are doing it in markets. There's general contractors and developers that are doing it in various markets. There's owner operators. So I think it comes back to um, truly taking a long-term view. And I think it happens at the building segment level. So the typology, as I mentioned, like multifamily, I think it's going to happen on where a lot more repetition in smaller units happens first. And then I think, and also where you go, you have structures where you have a lot of logistical issues to deal with in the city. So going tall quick is beneficial, or being able to go horizontal very fast is beneficial to the project outcomes.
Mhm.
I don't know. I can't give you a specific market where I think it's going to be more successful than others, other than to point at the few states that have actually gone through the hurdles of already kind of streamlining these approvals.
Mhm. I mean, I think to look at, like, again, kind of premises of getting hell yes, which is, all aligned with demand side selling. I think we can totally agree that the demand for it exists, right? Like the gap in the market for housing is not going to solve itself with the existing methods that we've got. Like, you're a fool. I think we can arbitrage certain regional opportunities to be able to build housing, and maybe move people around, but ultimately, I can't remember the numbers in the US, but it's something like we have to double the amount of houses we have right now. It's something like ridiculous like that. And, to achieve that, we're just not going to do that the same way. It's not going to be sticks and hammers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if you look at the numbers, I mean, I think I've seen some data points where we have a shortage of 1.5 million units all the way up through almost to 7 million, right? And there's
Yeah, we build 1.7 million a year. Build 1.7 million single families a year. We're building, what, 4 million multifamilies a year. Like, we're short.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, well, and that's, and then, I think if you look at the total numbers, the production, the gap's getting, again, the delta keeps increasing. We're not chipping away at it yet.
Mhm.
And no, I agree with you. Well, and that's why we exist as an organization, why we have existed for the last, decade and a half, is we need to be continuously exploring what these alternative options are. We need to be thinking about, if we're going to double, if as a builder, if I want to double my production over the next 5 to 10 years, what does that look like? And what are the technologies that are going to support me in doing that across
Mhm.
the entire life cycle or value chain? And that's what we're here to support, is that kind of cross pollination and conversation, so that folks that are trying one thing can share what they've learned, and again, vice versa, so that we can all get there faster. It's easier to stand on one another's shoulders to get where we got to go, right?
100%, totally. So for those that are trying to get into, want to learn more about you and what you guys are doing, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so they can email me at dennis@housinginnovation.org, or check us out on the website. It's www.housinginnovationalliance.com.
And who's your best kind of, like, you know, who is it builders that you're looking to talk to the most? Is it suppliers? Who's the best kind of candidate for that conversation?
Yeah, so we have, when I talk about the 2,000 companies that are in the network, it's kind of everybody within the housing ecosystem. So it's
Hmm.
developers, building product manufacturers, architects, engineers, trade contractors, kind of anybody who's supporting the builder or the developer in creating that housing solution. They're within
Hmm.
this ecosystem. So I think it's not so much about, we're serving the residential built environment. The question is, do you have the mindset that I described earlier? And are you interested and passionate about trying to get ahead of the curve, and sharing what you're learning, and learning from others that we're willing to share? Then that's the folks that we're looking for this conversation.
Right. So when you're talking about that, we kind of, the promise is always give a bit of insight in terms of hell yes. When you're talking about your markets and who you're selling to, and obviously, like you mentioned earlier, lots of different stakeholders that you need to kind of convert to bring them to the take them to the river, so to speak. What's the what are you looking for when you're trying to find someone who's hell yes? Like, you must get a lot of no's, right? But then you find that hell yes in one of those stakeholders, and what are you looking for from them to know that that's where you should be investing your time and trying to and helping them understanding what the future of housing looks like?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to those 3 points that I articulated earlier, right? It's, are they personally motivated to grow, and to
Hmm.
share, drive this growth? Do they have an organization that allows them to be, to take, or that is set up to take what they're learning, and drive it into the business? And is there a desire to leave a legacy on the industry that they've committed their careers to? So I think, and it's, I in a course of a conversation, you can see if those 3 things exist, or if they, and there's been plenty of teams that we've talked to where they may have had 1 and 3, but 2 wasn't there yet, and they work with their organization to get that set up, and we even support them to do it. So that
Outstanding.
it's interesting when we, you can, it's better now because everything's in Zoom, or virtual calls. Before it was over the phone, you couldn't see it. when we're having conversations and we're talking through the different aspects of what we do with our market engagement activities and how we're creating value through this crowd accelerated innovation platform, the light bulb goes off in these conversations when we're talking around those 3 points. And you know, getting to hell yes, it's a moment in their eyes, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it, and it's a lot about what it is for us, because again, it's all about the people and the will and the sharing that takes place in this platform we've created.
And they're not going to find out other ways. Like, I mean, you know, this is a built environment. There has to be some sort of proof. So otherwise, how are they going to learn?
Right. Well, and that's, you know, and a big part of that is, so, you know, we talked about our concept house, but a lot of the folks that I mentioned, you know, that are those 150 to 200 that are in here actively pursuing projects and programs. I mean, they're running their own pilots and they're sharing what's going on within those pilots within the community. So we're not necessarily broadcasting that to the world. You know, we host a variety of virtual events to share, you know, to share nationally what we're working on. We have in-person events to share it and have these conversations with one another and kind of check in to see how things are progressing. But not all of this is being shared in a market-facing way. A lot of it is still happening behind the scenes because, you know, there's NDAs in place. There's certain comforts until things have been proven out successful. How much do we want to share? And when we're ready to share about those pain points, we do.
Outstanding. Well, my takeaway here is I'm going to get you introduced to the folks at ATCO so that you guys can have a good conversation. There's tons to share there. Who should I talk to next in your network? Want to have this conversation out there?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different pathways, we can go in that. I think if you want to speak to someone who's very focused on kind of the consumer engagement and the connection between how we market, design, and then build homes, there's some folks over at Hierarch I think would be a great connection point. If you want to continue to pull on the modular thread, and even you might even be able to run into the conference that you're at there now, the folks over at Amherst are
Amherst.
They're an interesting team that has they're working on some of the same things we've talked about on the volumetric modular construction side and doing it at scale for building. But yeah, I could throw a bunch of names or a bunch of different organizations out there that are working on some things that we talked about. I think those two would be great if you kind of think about from an industry and consumer perspective.
Oh, outstanding. Well, anytime we're talking about innovation, it's very thought engaging and I would say controversial too, right? Which makes it a good conversation. So yeah, I'd love to get and chat with some of those folks. For everyone listening here, thanks a lot, Dennis, for your time today. This is super interesting, especially around like the future of housing and how we're going to solve these problems. Really, for every single demographic, I think that you take a look at modular housing and see how it can be applied. I mean, we're not talking about inhabiting Mars at this juncture, but really it is about, you know, taking a look at how we're going to solve the principal problems around affordability, around quality, around supply. And like as I said, mentioned earlier, I just don't see how there is a world where we can do this without some sort of technological innovation around the process by which we build these things. So Dennis, thank you so much for all of your time today and all of your insights doing that. For everyone listening, this is live today. We're pushing this out in a podcast probably before Christmas, and there'll probably be some more blog posts out there. So if you listen on Spotify or Apple, check us out right there. And then Dennis, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I think this is going to be a very fruitful and engaging conversation for a lot of folks before the holidays, and a lot of food for thought, definitely, as we're thinking about what 2025 looks like, the change that's been put upon us with just the way the market and the world is looking, and this incoming population of home seekers that are going to be looking to live in somewhere. How are they going to do it given the prices of salaries and inflation? And so I really value this conversation. I hope everyone else listening feels the same way.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you, sir.
Hey,
This is awesome. Hang tight. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
All right.